Good morning. My name is Chris Kevitt. My pronouns are she and her. I have our opening words for this morning. We are here today because we want our religious journey to include more than one Holy Land, more than one vision, more than one scripture. When we look around us here today, we see the beauty of diversity. People of various sizes and shapes, heads of different colors and textures. We see an age span of generations. We are aware of personality differences, of differences in perspective, of ancestors who represent every continent of our world. Come, let us celebrate our diversity. Come, let us worship together.
It's hard without our handle. What's in there? It's a picture. Have any of you seen a picture of this person before? No? She might be unknown to a lot of you. Her name is Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. That's a lot of names. But the reason I wanted to tell you about her is she connects a lot with some of the things Reverend Nick's going to be talking with the grown-ups about today. And also we're going to be learning about when we go into our class today. So now we haven't heard about Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. Let me hear. Have you heard John Adams? Show of hands. Okay. Have you heard Susan B. Anthony? Have you heard of Christopher Reeve? Rachel Carson? Okay. But you haven't heard hers. And her hand was on the Ark of Justice, just as those people were. And so I want to tell you a little bit about Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. She was born a free Black woman in Baltimore, Maryland in 1825. And she was raised in the household of her uncle, who was an educator and an African Methodist Episcopal minister. He was also an abolitionist. Does anybody know what that word abolitionist means? You guys are a little younger. Go ahead. Yeah, someone who said it's not okay to enslave Black people. It's not okay to enslave anyone. And Harper followed in her uncle's footsteps, and she too became an educator and an abolitionist. She also became a writer. Anybody here like to write? Yeah? What do you like to write? Anybody here write poetry? Yes. So she wrote, she published her first book of poetry at age 20. And she became the first African-American woman to publish a short story later in her life. And her writing was important because it urged Blacks, women, and people in oppressed groups to take a firm stand for equality. Now, that's also a big word. What is equality? Anybody know? Yeah. It's a big word. Anybody out there? Yeah. When people are equal to each other. As Unitarian Universalists, do we believe pretty strongly that we should treat everybody with the same inherent worth and dignity, right? That each person is wonderful and created and should have the same rights as each other? Yeah, we do. So it's no surprise that as she was living at that time, that it became dangerous. If you know history, it became dangerous for her to be a free Black woman when there were different laws being passed and people could say she ran away, but she had never been a slave, right? She was free and had always been free and wanted to stay that way. So she ended up moving kind of closer to us in Ohio. And then she helped people in the Underground Railroad. That was part of her work. She also went around because she was a writer and she hung out with people that were in the movements to help free other people, that she actually got to use her voice and speak from pulpits like this and at places and churches around the country to share those ideas to help influence and inspire others and bend that arc of justice. And while she saw that there was still so much work to be done, she co-founded the National Association of Colored Women. And she toured and lectured. And she also was a mother. And after her husband died, she took her daughter on the lecture tours with her. That's pretty unheard of at that time. During that time, she met many Unitarians also working to bend the arc of justice, and she felt at home. And so she joined hands with them by joining the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia. And she frequently read her poetry from the pulpit. And yet she also was able to keep her membership and taught Sunday school at the AME church. So sometimes we can have 2 or more spiritual homes, like Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. And while she did not live to see the 19th Amendment, anybody know what that is? Out there? Yeah, women got the right to vote because we didn't have it when they started it, did we? No, we did not. And there's still lots of things that women are fighting for. And so, even if that dream that you have might be really far off down the line and it might not happen for you, you still need to dream it and get out there and use your voice for it, just like Frances Ellen Watkins Harper did, because it might make a difference for your daughter or niece down the line or grandchildren down the line, right? And so it's upon us to raise your hands out for that arc of justice and to keep on going. And so we're going to sing you guys out to your class, okay?
A little over a week ago, I went to the first Interfaith Day of Prayer service. Many faith traditions were represented, and there were many prayers. Some were structured like those that I remember from my Christian upbringing, and others were a little different. I don't really consider myself a person who prays. So it was pretty easy, though, to sit there and listen to all those prayers. I loved that the event was even happening. As UUs, we are encouraged to grow in our faith as individuals and as congregations, and to embrace pluralism. The current Article 2 contains Principle 3, which says that we covenant to accept one another and encourage spiritual growth in our congregations. And it lists the sources that we look to for inspiration and for spirit. It lists the sources that we look to for inspiration: the deeds and words of prophetic people, world religions, and Jewish, Christian, humanist, and earth-centered teachings, as well as our own direct experience of mystery and wonder. It's my favorite. The proposed Article 2, to be voted on at General Assembly next month, includes pluralism as one of the values upon which we base our faith. It says that we celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. So last month, I participated in part of the Interfaith Bridge Builders Conference that occurred on this campus. One of the presenters, Bibi Barani, impressed me with her kindness and graciousness. Again and again, she used the word respect. It is more than acceptance. As I listen to the interfaith prayers, I try to keep her words in mind. I try to practice being respectful, because that's not something I usually think about. Our congregation here is diverse in belief. A few times I've seen ministers run a very interesting exercise, and they have us group or order ourselves by our theologies. Very interesting. We have always been diverse, and we are becoming more so. The UUA website tells us that no one needs to change their beliefs or identity in order to be UU. We are people of many beliefs, honoring each person's heritage and search for truth. So, we are offered a lot to which we might aspire. Our work trying to be allies for racial justice has taught us that we will make mistakes. We need to be thoughtful and be willing to apologize sincerely, and when you know better, do better. We need to learn to do better. And I think this is good advice as we become even more diverse in belief and in gender-related aspects. So are we thoughtful with all the pronouns, including we and us, which are words that create a boundary? How widely do we draw that circle? How permeable is it? May we consider these questions with awareness and courage. Our opening words today were written by Betty Bobo Sidon, a member of the First Unitarian Church of Oakland, California, and published in an anthology of meditations by Black UUs in 1991. In an article in UU World in 2010, she wrote this: "What needs to change for Unitarian Universalism to grow more diverse is our vision. We need to change how we look at people. If we can look in the faces of people whose physical appearance is very different from us and honestly say, I see my mother, my father, my sister, my brother, my aunt, my uncle, my cousin, my friend, then maybe we can survive in a multicultural world. May we look in people's faces with respect so that we can grow and survive together."
We have two readings today. The first reading was written in 1977, and it is from the Combahee River Collective statement. And this is an excerpt from it. The psychological toll of being a Black woman and the difficulties this presents in reaching political consciousness and doing political work can never be underestimated. There's a very low value placed upon a Black woman's psyches in this society, which is both racist and sexist. As an early group member once said, we are all damaged people merely by virtue of being Black women. We are dispossessed psychologically and on every other level, and yet we feel the necessity to struggle to change the condition of all Black women. In, quote, "A Black Feminist Search for Sisterhood," Michelle Wallace arrives at this conclusion. Quote, "We exist as women who are Black, who are feminists, each stranded for the moment, working independently because there is not yet an environment in this society remotely congenial to our struggle, because being on the bottom, we would have to do what no one else has done. We would have to fight the world." end quote. Wallace is pessimistic, but realistic in her assessment of Black feminist position, particularly in her allusion to the nearly classic isolation most of us face. We might use our position at the bottom, however, to make a clear leap into revolutionary action. If Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all the systems of oppression.
Our second reading this morning is titled A Litany of Survival by Audre Lorde. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing on the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone, for those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways coming and going in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward at once, before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for by this illusion, by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hoped to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. And when the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. And when our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. And when we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive.
I must begin with the mother in the room. I mean, the elephant in the room. Mother's Day, you see, and more broadly, our understandings of the ideas, roles, relationships, and feelings related to mothers can be complicated, to be really, really messy. I sort of always have trepidation about this Sunday. So to acknowledge the emotional breadth and meaning this day may hold for each of us, I want to share these words of affirmation from my colleague, the Reverend Linda Susan Ulrich. For all the mothers and mother figures, the grandmothers, aunts, and extended family members who mother, the soon-to-be mothers, the wish they were mothers, the never wanted to be mothers, it's complicated mothers, the birth mothers, the foster mothers, adoptive mothers, stepmothers, the used to be dad mothers and more than one mom mothers, the single mothers, separated mothers, the stay-at-home mothers, unhoused mothers, the grieving mothers, those who grieve their own mothers, and those whose grief is complex. For all the communities that mother, and for all who depend on the great mother, you are held and beloved. Yes, you, each of you, all of us are held in this community of love. Indeed, we are each beloved to one another. I've said many times that one of our unifying realities in this congregation is that we are all currently children or were once children. Similarly, regardless of our gender, race, class, religious identity, sexual orientation, ability, etc., we each share a common origin story, that is, coming into this world through the sacred, mysterious, messy journey of birth. No matter how our lives and circumstances have unfolded since, I believe and say again that you are each beloved and held just as you are in this community of love. The purpose of today's service is not so much an exploration of our personal relationships to motherhood, but rather an invitation into a deeper appreciation of the mystical, transgenerational lineage of wisdom and resilience that continues to this day, that passes through the lives of Black women in this country. Somehow, in the process of our unfurling from bud to flower, we lost a taproot that nourishes us and leads us back toward our essential interdependence, and thus our primordial interexistence with all life. Some might personify this taproot of the sacred thread we share and are woven together by as the Great Mother. And yes, often the concept of mother, while reducing gender diversity, is a powerful and profound image of our universal origin, our oneness, and our destiny in this epic we call life. Over the past several years, actually since I arrived here, I've been turning back more and more to the wisdom of Black women, especially Black queer women, who for centuries have held the vision of liberating futures, they've held them, futures almost unimaginable, but for their resilience and leadership. For example, in 2017, just weeks before you called me as your minister, just 2 days from now, 7 years ago, a life-changing book, in my opinion, was published, a world-changing book that has shaped much of my own thinking around ministry and community. It's called Emergent Strategy: Shaping Change, Changing Worlds by Adrienne Marie Brown. If you haven't explored the gift that this is of the mind, heart, spirit, and hands, I encourage you to read it. What followed from this publication has been an unfolding series of around a dozen publications taken together in what is called the Emergent Strategy series. Again, each resource, I believe, is worthy of your time. Along with these texts, I stumbled into the world of other publications, podcasts, and projects that all exist in a living ecosystem of liberation. Over the years, I began to realize that one through line, one thread from most of these resources of wisdom was that the vast majority of these authors are Black women. On top of that, these authors all seem to not only know one another, but love each other as well. This became apparent recently when I stumbled upon a podcast that I also, this is a recommendation sermon, clearly, I would recommend, called Finding Our Way. Finding Our Way is hosted by Prentice Hemphill. Prentice, who uses they, them pronouns, is a therapist, a somatics teacher and facilitator, a political organizer, writer, and the founder of the Embodiment Institute. On Finding Our Way, Prentice hosts movement leaders, many of whom are Black women. And one thing I noticed over and over is the practice these women have of acknowledging and lifting up the lineage they feel to their spiritual and movement foremothers. This value of transgenerational lineage of wisdom and practice has been seemingly present for hundreds of years in the United States, whether we feel it, most of us, or not. And this is especially noticeable through the leaders in any given age who identify as Black women. This morning, I want to reach back to one set of foremothers that on the whole, as a congregation, we may not be very familiar with. Namely, I want to explore the work and legacy of the Combahee River Collective. How many of you have heard of the Combahee River Collective before? It's something that I've only recently become more aware of. This year marks the 50th anniversary since the first gathering of the collective, which developed its seminal statement of purpose a few years later in 1977. The Combahee River Collective statement begins with this self-definition of the group. Quote, "We are a collective of Black feminists who have been meeting together since 1974. During that time, we have been involved in the process of defining and clarifying our politics, while at the same time doing political work and within our own group and in coalition with other progressive organizations and movements. The most general statement of our politics at this present time would be that we are all actively committed to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression, and see our particular task, the development of an integrated analysis and practice based upon the fact that the major systems of oppression are interlocking. So 12 years before Kimberly Crenshaw, the founder of the legal field of critical race theory and professor at Columbia Law School, would coin the term intersectionality, a group of poor Black lesbian women who were socialists as well, articulated a similar sentiment about the intersection that not only exists, but out of which their identities and activism could not be removed. In their statement, the collective offers reflections on what they define as contemporary Black feminism, its beliefs, its goals, and its current projects. Without going through the whole document, I could attempt to summarize this statement, poorly maybe, as a critique of some of the social justice movements of the era, most notably the feminist movement. The statement reads, quote, "As Black feminists, we are made constantly and painfully aware of how little effort white women have made to understand and combat their racism, which requires, among other things, that they have a more than superficial comprehension of race, color, and Black history and culture," end quote. This sentiment can be true of many social justice movements, where a single identity is raised above the water of concern with the rest of the identities submerged below. What Black feminism invites is a more passionate, intersectional understanding of our collective liberation. In a single sentence, they articulate a very convincing, to me at least, hypothesis, quote, "If Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all the systems of oppression," end quote. Let me say it again, quote, "If Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free. Everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all the systems of oppression," end quote. In articulating this hypothesis, they extend the visions and memories of Black mothers through generations prior to those in the present day. And what I also read in this hypothesis, this statement of faith, is this: that despite the systems of oppression that keep Black women and those of innumerable struggles unfree, their lives, spirit, visions, and memories have survived through the ages. They survived. Audre Lorde beautifully articulates this double meaning of the oppression and resilience of Black women in her poem, A Litany of Survival. She writes, quote, "For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone, for those those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways, coming and going in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward at once, before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures like bread in our children's mouths so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, this heavy-footed hoped to silence us, for all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. These words echo through the lives and activism of Black women and BIPOC movement leaders today. You can hear the teachings and wisdom passed down through a line of Black mother memories, the teachings of intersectionality and the practice of collective liberation, of community accountability and transformative justice. When Lorde concludes her poem with the call to live and to life in the face of death, it is a casting of vision out beyond present imaginings of what is possible to unknown worlds yet to be birthed together. She writes to her fellow members of the Combahee River Collective, whose statement was just a year prior, and every one of those living on the brink, looking to the unknown future, and to all of us here in generations to come, to rise above the fear and death toward the love and life that is before them. Quote, "When we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed, but when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive." End quote. As Unitarian Universalists, or perhaps for those of us who have not experienced lives of multiple intersecting oppressions, it can be hard to fully grasp and relate to the fear and resilience of Black women in their ability to both survive and live in the face of death. But we have opportunities. Actually, life is a continuous opportunity to remember, to reconnect, and to be reborn into the lineage of struggle and strength, hope and courage for a present and future rooted more in love, more in liberation. On this Mother's Day, we can consider not only the mothers in our lives and memories, but also the mothers who are often overlooked and forgotten. Mother, as metaphorically, opens up so much rich and life-transforming possibilities. Beyond biological motherhood, we are all connected by creeks and streams, tributaries, all to the river that flows but one direction, to the sea. May our flowing find meaning and purpose in this memory of Black mothers of time immemorial, and Black women alive today, daring to not only survive, but envision new tomorrows, better than those of yesteryear, alluring us from this day into the next and the next. With such wisdom and resilience, there is no need to fear. Rather, may we take any fear we have and transform it into love and nourishment for this world. May we turn to the Black mothers of Unitarian Universalism, those living and those now ancestors. Black mothers of spirit like Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, the Reverend Marjorie Bowens Wheatley, the Reverend Rosemary Bray McNatt, and the dozens of other often erased and invisible leaders in our own liberal and liberating tradition. May we seek out the memory, the wisdom, the ministry, and the visions of our UU and non-UU Black women who called and continue to call us forward to a better future. May we recall the wisdom of Adrienne Marie Brown, who reminds us simply and profoundly that what we pay attention to grows. What we pay attention to grows. And so may we give thanks for the Black Mother memories which are available to us to honor, uplift, and grow, not only on the second Sunday of May, but in each and every day of our lives that we are so blessed to live. May it be so, and amen.